So I did want to talk to you about the audience, which in this day and age of so many cool things being done in technology seems like a soft topic, one that might not be of interest to you. But I assure you that of all the work I've been doing in the last decade, this is the topic I always come back to because it's the most important thing to understand as storytellers. So on top of being a writer and a producer for 25 years now in Hollywood, I'm at heart, though, a storyteller. I've branched out into a lot of different fields in the last 10 years, just out of interest and out of opportunity. But the thing that I've found is that I go around now and do a lot of consulting, creative consulting, and I've done a lot of narrative design work. These are big fancy terms. I'm still a writer. And I've noticed that as I've worked for some really big companies like 343 Industries and Lucasfilm, who are the managers of these huge transmedia properties like Halo and Star Wars, that they become very obsessed about how they can stay on top of things, how they can stay ahead of the curve when it comes to branching out their properties into all of these transmedia platforms. And I think it's very important to consider things like new technologies, new business models, new formats for the content. But at the end of the day, as a storyteller, what I've noticed is that those things are important, but really the audience is one variable that's changing as fast as all of those other aspects of storytelling. And I think it's very, very hard to stay ahead of the audience because they're evolving so quickly, so rapidly. And my presentation today is a kind of fun and interesting look at what the audience is going through. And because we are all audience members ourselves, sometimes we just forget that. I think it's important right now to kind of step into the other person's shoes and be an audience member for a moment and think about how people experience media in today's environment. So everything began for us back around the campfire when we started storytelling. And at heart, we really are all storytellers. It's in our DNA. We're also listeners, some of us. And when you think about the first couple thousand years, not a lot changed. We migrated out from the campfire into an electronic campfire inside our living room. And really the source of the stories became different in television and in film and in radio. But the audience really was able to have a one-to-one relationship with the story and themselves, and then things became a little different with convergence. And when I talk about convergence, I talk about how some three big principles, the economic, the technological, and the cultural changes that all came kind of towards the end of the 20th century and forced people to start thinking about how they made media. And the audience, of course, doesn't think about how they engage with media. They just do it. It's intuitive. And they have gone through a rapid change. One of the things that I like to talk about is what's called a durable mutation. And in biology, species go through change, and they get to a place where they have to adapt based on their environmental changes. And a durable mutation is something where they've reached a point of stasis. Everything has changed around them, they've adapted, and they finally fit in and they survive. And I feel like one of the things that's happened for the audience is they've reached a place where they've been given power. They've been trying to find their way, their relationship with media, and through the power of choice, we've kind of opened a Pandora's box. We've given the viewer a remote, we've given them a device, we've given them one-click buying opportunities that has put them in a place where they are now in control. And that Pandora's box will never be closed. We will never give the power back to the audience. And in fact, they will only want more. And so as storytellers, it's our obligation to understand when someone turns on a screen in their home of any kind, what is going on in their head? Well, one of the things that's happening is with that empowerment is becoming essentially a revolution. The audience is armed now with screens in their hand that puts them in charge, not just of how they consume media, but of how they tell stories. And that concept of the audience as creators, as collaborators, is a huge phenomenon. One of the things that I'm doing in a new company is I've started RainSpark Labs, which is a mobile development lab. And we are doing all sorts of interesting technological developments for social applications on mobile, for mobile games, for m-commerce. And we did a lot of research into this area. And one of the things that's interesting is that in just a few years, people have come to expect instant access to everything on their mobile device. And even those who don't have smartphones and mobile devices are already contemplating what they're going to do when they have them. And I think I just saw a figure that said Apple expects to sell something like 100 million iPhone 5s. So when we think about how large the audience is already, within the next couple months, there's 100 million more people going to be having smartphones in their hands. Now, granted, some of that is overlap, but I think it's a key indicator of how quickly people are moving into this realm of mobile entertainment. Social mobile is a key in terms of being able to tell people stories and give them an opportunity to share it with themselves, to talk about it, to contribute to it. All these compulsions are now, in some ways, contradictory to the passive media experience. And one of the reasons I wanted to focus on this is that when you think about telling a 2-hour story or a 1-hour story in the TV format, those things don't change. Those stories are still great, they're still very powerful, but the people sitting in the seats are different. Because most of the time in their lives, they're out completely empowered with a device, experiencing content in a new way. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're making stories, who you have in your seats, who your audience is. So when we talk about the audience, the truth is the audience is not one thing. It's a large kind of roiling mass of people, all with completely different agendas. And we like to break it down into demographics, but I had some fun breaking it down into subspecies. So, of course, there's the moviegoer. And again, I come back to something that happens to me a lot. I have a almost 14-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. And we live on an island over in Puget Sound. And we, when we moved there, decided we're unplugging, we're not going to get television. This is from someone who worked in television for 20 years. It was a very hard thing to do. And in fact, my wife and I still sneak in television all the time. But we don't have an actual television set because we wanted to take the remote out of the kids' hands and get them to go play outside. That's why we moved from LA. So we invested some money into a really nice screening room. And it's in a separate building on the property, and we've got big, huge Blu-ray, high definition, whatever, and we wanted to have family nights. It was something that I had when I was a kid. Every night we'd watch the ABC Sunday night movie or the Disney movie or whatever it was, and I had great memories of that. And so we built this big movie theater, and after about 6 months of trying to do family movie night, my kids started complaining that what they'd rather do is go play games. Can we have family game night? And I thought, wow, this is, again, someone who, I have a huge library of movies. I've seen some movies 30, 40 times. I love movies. I love television. But the point is, my kids who had an opportunity to see movies the way that I never did, right? In a private screening room, essentially. What they really wanted to do was play games. It's not that they don't like movies, it's that it's very hard for movies to hold their attention. If I take them to see Avatar in the big theater, it's such a sensory experience, of course it holds their attention. But sitting at home, what they'd rather do is play a game. And I think that part of that is the environment. Part of it is that they're at home and they don't think of that as a movie theater. That was partly a tactical error on my part. But I think on the other hand, movies are a very passive form of entertainment, which is fantastic. But again, what you have in the seat is someone who is used to being active the other 22 hours of their day when they're awake. Next one is the couch potato, which is the TV viewer. And, interesting thing about television is I used to watch it a lot with my brother and my parents, and I remember we said nothing. Everyone always talks about how television is this social event. I don't remember ever having conversations with my family when I was watching television. But interestingly, now when I watch my kids watch television online, they do talk a lot. They and my son especially and his friends talk a lot, and what they talk about is not what's on television. And one of the things that you find is when they watch television online, they watch it on a screen while they are surfing the internet, which brings up our next category, the web surfer. The interesting thing about online is it's the ultimate remote. It's not a couple hundred channels that people have to choose from. It's a couple million. And watching my son surf the web constantly, I don't know how he comes up with these things to do keyword searches on, but they just rapid fire and they're just constantly looking for things while there's a television show screening on a little window on their computer. So I think it's important to understand, again, how people are consuming content. The mobile user is someone who, generally, the mobile phone is a point of social connection. It's become something that you can actually stream content to, watch news bites on, watch little episodes. Now it's become a gaming channel. The gamer, in particular, is one that's very interesting because games now have moved. It used to be that the gamer was someone that was relegated to the basement screen, and their parents would be yelling at them the whole time, and they'd be playing on these LAN networks and doing all sorts of stuff, and there was a stigma to them. But now gaming has kind of spread onto all of these different platforms, and you have social gaming where you have the soccer moms giving Zynga millions of dollars. You have all of these mobile games that are taking over and frankly have consumed the platform industry, the console industry, to the point where now all of the big companies are trying to figure out how to get into mobile gaming. These are phenomenons that are, on one hand, as people that are making movies and television, you just kind of push aside and you say that has nothing to do with us, but in fact it does. It has a lot to do with us because that's how people want to spend their time. And it's not that they don't want film and television, it's just that they are having an affair with a very seductive mistress. So one of the things that these little archetypes that I just presented doesn't take into account is the fact that really all of those little groups have all crossbred, and we are all of them. We are the moviegoer, we are the TV watcher, we are the mobile user and the gamer. We are all of these things wrapped into one. And we are all really hybrid audience goers. There's a little anecdote I want to tell you about this picture here. When I got originally in business with MTV, they had come to an earlier company I had called Electric Farm Entertainment, where we were doing a lot of transmedia and multi-platform storytelling, starting off with original digital properties, instead of doing extensions of existing brands or franchises. And they came to us because they had seen one of the early shows we did called Afterworld. which had garnered a huge international audience, and really was working on 3 different screens. And they said, we'd really like you to create something for us, for our audience, because we've been doing a study for the last 3 years. And we've found something that's very troubling about our audience. And they revealed, basically, the 3-screen conundrum. And they said, here's what we have found our typical audience member is doing. They are sitting on a bed, watching our network, hooray, and they have a laptop open that they're using, and they're talking to a friend on the phone. And when we asked people to rank which screen was most important, they said, well, I guess the phone, because I'm talking to someone that's a friend of mine, and the internet, because things pop into my head, or I'm surfing, or I see things on TV that I want to explore. And then, so I guess third would be the TV. And MTV had this horrible realization that their channel was ambient, and that it probably was only a matter of time before the advertisers started to understand this and didn't want to pay as much for those ad rates. So they came to us, MTV, and said, can you design a show or an experience that can play simultaneously across all of those 3 screens? Not just as a different window, but actually something different that's designed for each of those 3 mediums. So that when our audiences are sitting on the bed and they want to use all of those 3 screens at the same time, they actually have a reason to. But everything on those 3 screens comes from us and has some kind of brand integration. In this case, it was Verizon, which was a natural. The other thing to consider here is that all of the stuff we did for Electric Farm was very small episodic content. Our episodes were 2-3 minutes at a time. They were literally just little bites of content. And people consumed them ravenously. And interestingly, when we were doing Afterworld, another little anecdote, we had 130 episodes that we produced of that series, and it was a big sci-fi kind of adventure mystery, not unlike Lost. And we got into a cadence where we were distributing the episodes on YouTube, and we were doing 1 episode a day, 5 days a week. And we were literally going to be spreading this out over 6 months. About 3 weeks into it, people said, why? These are 2- and 3-minute episodes. Why are you only doing 1 a day? Can't you give us like 5 a day? It's like, well, but then it'll end sooner. So there was a lot of hue and cry about why we weren't doing it, and if we didn't get the episode right at noon, we would get flamed. We would get threats of fire bombs and whatnot. So we took that as a compliment. People really wanted this little 2-minute, it was really important to them, this little 2-minute episode at noon every day. So we did a survey, and we had, at one point, we had thousands and thousands of people viewing the show every day. And we said, what would you rather have? An episode every day, Monday through Friday, or all 5 episodes in a block on Friday? You tell us. We'll do it whichever way you want. We're here for you. And the response was 50-50. Response was, we want it every day, or we want it on Friday. And then almost everyone said, but what we'd really like is 5 episodes every day. Which just goes to illustrate that you cannot please the audience. No matter what you give them, they want more. One of the things that I find absolutely fascinating, and I want to point to, I don't know if you can read it. I've done a lot of research on Twitter. I find it's a great way to take the pulse of the audience. And I've started collecting tweets that interest me, particularly about multiscreen multitasking. And this one in particular I love. It says, doing homework, texting, and tweeting at the same time. Epic teen multitasking. Now, the thing I like about that is, look how many people retweeted it. This was a very important and popular representation of one audience member really who is speaking for a generation. And I think it's terrifying to a certain degree to think about the attention spans that these people have. But there is one huge upside to this, is that they have a ravenous appetite for content. And I think one of the things that I've noticed being in the transmedia business and now being in a mobile lab, people are willing to pay for their content. I know that there's right now in gaming in particular, there's this movement of freemium, and certainly everybody wants everything for free, and many people are pirating content. All of those things are true, but at the same time, people desperately want to be entertained. They want to be occupied, and there's a lot of things that people are willing to pay for. When you start looking at things like ownership, that's something that people my age are willing to pay for, but what people really want to pay for now is convenience and access. And when you look at things that are actually working, instant gratification is a huge seller. Again, I watch my son and my daughter, how they spend money, my money, on virtual goods. It's mind-boggling. It doesn't, to them, it's all exactly the same thing. To us, we look at it differently. It's like you're buying a little stick of dynamite that's a little digital thing that's going to get you out of a trouble in a game that you've worked yourself into for 99 cents. It's like there's no value in that. It's like, yes, there is, because to them, right there at that moment, getting out of that little problem spot is everything. And they live in a world too where 99 cents doesn't have any value. It's just it's zeros and ones. It's little bits, and I think pretty much anyone under a certain age sees money that way now. And so, creating opportunities for content that can be free, that can be enhanced, that can be expanded through monetary purchases. I really see that as a huge opportunity going forward. It's a very scary notion, being from traditional media, the thought of producing something where there isn't a guaranteed revenue model up front seems like a huge leap of faith. But the fact that it's working, especially on mobile, I think is an indicator that there's some real opportunity there going forward. One thing that I want to look at here at the end is when you break down the audience that we have to go after into its component parts, I think these are the big words that I was able to kind of pin on them. Social, empowered, fragmented, multitasking, and monetizable. And one of the things I want to kind of move right down to here at the bottom is this notion of a frictionless experience. And I think everything that technology does is looks for ways to make our lives more efficient and faster. And as I mentioned before, one of the things that our lab is looking into is this whole concept of m-commerce. But it's really the same thing that Amazon has pioneered, with their one-click purchase, where they take away all logic and reason from the buying process. And they prey on your whim. Right? And that's the world we live in. Everything is happening so fast, and technology is basically removing all friction from our thought process, and it's allowing us to just act intuitively. Not always in our best interest, but it's something to understand that when you build a media experience these days, it can't be hard, because everything that technology is doing right now is removing the friction. And so when you have a show on television that has a website, if it's hard to get from those two things to each other, people will go the other way. They're not used to that in their lives. They don't want that. They want things to be fast and easy. And so it's really important as you're building experiences across platforms to find ways that everything is seamless. The person only just has to keep clicking one button at a time to be led through the experience. I call it breadcrumbing. Incredibly important. The last slide here is basically a recap. It seems like it's common sense, but I can't tell you how many times in my travels people forget about these really basic things. And as I said in the beginning, they get focused on all of the new stuff. But it's really, really important to understand your audience, to look at each platform for its strengths. Those slides I had about dropping everyone into categories of subspecies, while they were funny, the truth is that when you sit in front of a screen, you, as an audience member, have a completely different expectation for what that experience is going to be, whether it's sitting in a leather chair watching a television or sitting on a laptop in a hotel room, whether it's walking down the street on your mobile phone or even in a theater. Next time you go into a theater, look at how many people are pained to have to turn off their phone. Just absolutely pained, right? And how many people actually sneak little peeks at their phone, because that's who the audience is these days. That's what they want to be doing. They're making a sacrifice for you to sit through a 2-hour movie. Again, I find Twitter is an amazing way to follow trends. It's very trendy in and of itself to follow Twitter, but I find that I have a whole set of keyword searches, right, that I type in, things that are interesting to me, and every morning, that's how I read the news now. I just go and I see what everyone else is talking about and how they're talking about it. I think it's really important to stay on top of technological and social trends. Another thing that Twitter really is good for. The big thing here at the end is the payment plan. One last little anecdote, and then I'll be done. This idea of customizing choice in terms of payment for an audience member is really important because, as I said before, they've been given choice in terms of how they want to consume their content, where they want to consume it, when they want to consume it. But they also need the choice of how they want to pay for it. And well, you'd think, well, what are the choices? It's going to cost you money. Yes, but I think there's some really great innovations that haven't happened yet in terms of people being able to pay possibly with their attention. You're already starting to see a little bit in terms of how ads are served, where the content is being delivered free if you watch this 2-minute promotional thing about something or other. I think the next big thing you're going to see is people essentially surrendering their privacy and allowing and opening up their kind of digital consumer contrails to people in exchange for getting free content. And I think you're going to see the next generation of people completely willing to do this. I'm not saying go out and build this system now, but I'm saying that based on what I've been seeing and some high-level conversations I've been hearing with some brands and back channels, this will be happening. And I think even if you look at mobile games right now, people want to have the choice of how they buy things. So that stick of dynamite, when I look at the menu of how my daughter tried to purchase it, it was offered as a single stick of dynamite for 99 cents, or 3 sticks of dynamite for $1.99, or 5 sticks of dynamite, or you could take 3,000 coins that you won in the game and buy that stick of dynamite, or you could download another game and get 5 sticks of dynamite. There was all of these options and all of these choices, and it's the Costco effect, right? People want to be able to make that choice on how they want to spend their time and their money. So hopefully this has been somewhat empowering to you as audience members to understand and just take a moment to think about what everyone is thinking about when they're watching your television show, your movie, or your content. Just remember to take them in mind when you're building your experience, and most importantly, remember that you are them. Right, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. If anyone has any questions, now's the time. And remember, I'm going to make this available to everybody, and as I said before, there's a couple slides that I've included at the end with some facts and figures and all of that stuff. Anyone? Anyone? Yes? So the question, if I heard you correctly, was the way things are going, this seems like a drug addiction, and will government start to regulate the amount of consumption? That's a great question.
He's from Lithuania.
Yeah. I can't speak for my government, and clearly I don't. But I don't. I think again, as I said, the Pandora's box has been opened. I think it's impossible to control people's content consumption other than pricing them out of, creating essentially a bottleneck. So if the cost to get access to the internet becomes too high, right, with data plans and all of this stuff, that's really the only way to regulate or control people's content consumption. With regards to your first point, which I think is actually more interesting, is it a drug addiction? Absolutely, right? Drugs are escapism. Drugs are a way to get away from reality. And that's really what good content is. It's escapism. It takes you away. It transports you someplace. So I think it is an addiction. And that probably is a whole other conversation we could have. Any other questions?
One more question.
Yes.
I'm curious if you see any new trends, particularly with the networks, the larger networks seeing Transmedia and seeing the YouTube's single person on YouTube on their soapbox who has 1 million subscribers. Are the networks moving towards this as a way to be across the country again and be in more regional places and potentially find innovation in how they deliver it? And NBC may have NBC's YouTube channel and NBC.com, but when is it all going to come together and become the new network?
That's a huge, big, great question. Let me see if I can even begin to answer it. I don't think it's ever going to come together. I think it's hopelessly torn apart, and I think it's better that way. I think when you look at NBC, and I've been in meetings with NBC and trying to understand the YouTube conundrum, it's very frustrating that some guy in his mom's basement can go online and get millions of people to watch his show. And what is his show? It's him talking in his mom's underwear. It's like, who knew? But the problem is that the brands want that desperately. They can't align themselves with that, right? They're still completely dependent on advertising revenue. They have a brand that they cannot tarnish by aligning themselves with basically completely unfiltered wild cards. And I think that aspect of entertainment is just, it's people being given a voice, and it's not going to go away. It's going to be very hard for the big brands and the networks to co-opt it. I think all they can do in terms of looking at transmedia is to look at something that's a little bit above that, which is, if you spend the money and the time to get someone invested in your show, you have their attention for half an hour a week, an hour a week. But if they're hooked into that, they want something else to do. So if you don't provide them a website to go dig more into that world or those characters, and easy, frictionless ways for them to talk about those characters and extend that engagement beyond that half hour every week, then you're leaving money on the table. And creating that kind of transmedia experience, I think, is on everyone's mind at the studios and the networks. Well, they begin because with the movie, you have their attention for 2 hours. And then several months, or actually now weeks later, it'll come out on DVD or Blu-ray, and then you can get their attention again, and then what? So I think it's finding ways to extend the engagement in between those pockets of spotlighted time that you have with the audience. And the advantage that the YouTube broadcaster has is that there's no barrier to entry. He can put content out anytime he turns on his camera. And that's impossible to compete with. And so I think on one hand, the sooner the broadcasters get over their fascination and fixation with becoming a YouTube phenomenon, the better. It's a whole new subgenre of content, and it has nothing to do with mainstream media.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to
Yes,
crap.
I know.
So thank you very much, Brent.